Hello and welcome to Murder Dictionary Podcast. I'm Brianna and that is Courtney.
Hello.
With a classic hello.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing good. Courtney is coming down with something, but I'm hanging in there. So we're packing up on vitamins and water at the moment.
I am the research when it comes to the vitamins. It works, the vitamins I take, but you can't always be Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Right? We all get sick.
We're fallible. It's okay.
A little bit.
It's okay. But we're going to make it through the episode.
Totally.
The first thing that I want to say before we get to anything else, I have kind of a big announcement. Some of you may notice that on the new episodes, there's ads. You're hearing advertisers about every 20 to 30 minutes. We have big, exciting news. We have moved over to a new host network that will be handling ads for us, which it's a very exciting milestone for a little show like us. So we're just an indie pod. We're just pouring tons of time and resources into episodes. And this is just a really great move forward for a small podcast like Murder Dictionary.
It's a big deal.
I'm excited. So having advertisers will help us with hosting fees, equipment costs, various technology that we use, website costs. The list goes on. All these expenses that, it's a labor of love and we love doing this. So we have poured a lot into it. The addition of ads will be really helpful to hopefully offset our own expenses that come out of pocket. So I'm really hoping that you guys as listeners will be happy for us that the show has this opportunity to grow in this kind of way because we're very excited about it. So I hope that you guys are happy and on board. Some of you that have been with us for a very long time, hopefully for you guys, it feels like a great thing too. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know, the podcasts that I listen to, because I mostly try to listen to indie podcasts. It's not that there's not great, huge network podcasts out there. It's just that I really want to support these small shows that, like us, just grew out of, someone's bedroom or something. I love that sort of thing. So whenever I see an indie podcast growing in that way, I get really happy for them that they're moving forward, that they're growing, that they're getting bigger. So hopefully, I hope that you guys feel that way about us. But that said, I'm really trying to space out the ads so I'm not inundating you with ads. I'm not going to put ads every 10 minutes. That's not what this is going to turn into. I really just want it to be, a couple times a show, and that's it. The other thing that's going to happen is if you're on our Patreon or if you want to join our Patreon, we're going to have the episodes ad-free. So as a perk, you will get ad-free episodes. You'll get the bonus episodes that we put out there. We just released a bonus episode about Natalia Barnett, who is the Ukrainian dwarf that was adopted and is possibly 30 years old.
She's 30.
So
I mean, in my opinion, I'm sorry. She's 30.
We dove deep into that on the most recent Patreon episode. So, but otherwise, I'm really excited.
This just means the sky's the limit.
It feels like I've been doing the show for 3 years. So from day one, you feel like a podcaster. But after making this move, it's like, oh no, I'm actually a podcaster that's doing this, that's legitimate. Does that make sense?
Podcasting street cred.
I feel like most adults have this imposter syndrome.
It's kind of a mile marker too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a milestone. Yeah. We've gotten to a certain point. We're actually approaching 1 million total all-time downloads coming up here probably in the next month or two.
That's such a big number.
Yeah, that plus this move to a new host site and having ads and stuff, it just feels really good that our podcast is able to really flourish in this way. And I'm really excited. It means a lot to me. And it means a lot that you guys have been supporters for so long, because all these people out there that are listening and downloading, that is how we get to achieve these things. So we really appreciate you. And we just want to say thank you for helping us get to here.
And now I have to say thank you too, because I just had my 1-year anniversary.
Yes. Oh yeah.
At Murder Dictionary. And I personally have to thank everybody for allowing me into, the secret club.
The Murder Dictionary clique.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, a lot to handle, something new, something different, right? But I really appreciate that you've allowed me in, and I just can't stop doing this.
Yeah.
Everything I do is for Murder Dictionary listeners. That's all this is now. So please let me entertain you. Right? With all my information.
Yeah, it's been really a really huge change and a great addition and a lot that you bring to the show. And I can't believe it's been a year already.
Isn't that insane?
It went by so quickly. But I just appreciate the different opinions that we have, the fact that you often have so much research, so many thoughts on what's going on with these cases and with these people. And it's just been invaluable to be a partner together. I think it's a really great fit. So I'm really excited. We're hitting milestone after milestone. It's your anniversary, the new host site coming up on 1 million downloads. So normally we don't take this long to get into an intro, but I do really want to point those things out because they're big deals. And I feel very proud and very happy and so overwhelmingly grateful to you guys for listening and helping us get to these points. That's what it comes down to. It's because of your support. We appreciate you, liking, rating, reviewing, subscribing, being on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All that makes a huge difference. And every time that you tell someone about Murder Dictionary, it really, really helps us. So all that you guys have done to support the show, spread the word, we just want to say thank you. Also, we've got new people on our Patreon that are now going to have access to that new bonus episode and ad-free episodes. So we wanted to say thank you to Terry, Manu, Sui, and Diana.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. We really appreciate you. Again, I feel like I could just talk for the next 10 minutes saying that I'm grateful in about 40 different ways, but I'll end it there so we can get to the story. So thanks, you guys. We appreciate everything. And let's jump into a new letter for this week.
That's right. We're on K.
We are on K for killer kids.
There's so many of them.
I know. And the thing is so normally I wouldn't repeat a letter that we already did, but I feel like having done this for a little while, looking back at the Killer Kids episodes we did before, I know that there were so many other cases that I wanted to do that I'm like, you know what? I think for the first time, I got to do the same subject for a letter. Even though it's never happened, I think this is the one where it's like, yeah, there's a lot that I would like to talk about.
It's a topic that goes on forever. There's a lot of killer kids. And as we learned in Gamers, when we were doing research, every 5 days in America, a kid kills their parents. That was a stat that was real and terrifying.
I was going to say real scary.
Real scary. So yeah, this will just keep happening.
A ton of cases like this out there. And for me, one of the things, like I always say, I just want to focus on, my huge emphasis is mental health and personal safety and watching out for each other. Those are like my 3 mission statement kind of thing. That's the core.
That's it.
And this is one of those things where in this case, people weren't watching out for each other. There was mental illness that was treated not well. This case always is going to be close to my heart for the simple fact that it's really about how we're able to treat mental health and look out for each other and look out for signs. And when you see something that's going wrong and don't say something, it's really leaving everyone open and vulnerable. So we're going to jump into our very first killer kid for this week, Christopher Pittman. So Chris was born on April 9th, 1989 in Huntsville, Alabama. His parents separated when he was still an infant, under 2 years old, they said, and his mother completely abandoned the family.
Weird.
It blows me away whenever I hear that. It's just such an uncommon thing. I know a couple people whose mother did the same thing and took off, but it always seems so strange to me that it's not just like, oh, okay, I'll see you on the weekends and the mom has less custody, which is also not very common. But when the mother just up and leaves and starts a new life somewhere else, it calls into question everything going on in the house. So is it something that happened to her where she just wants to leave and she wants to run and she wants something different? Or a lot of times you have to question, is there abuse going on in the home? And the only way she can get out is to just escape herself. And maybe getting the kids out would be too much or too difficult for her.
This is the exact example that people could use, for example, when the husband says, oh, she left. She just left us. And she went and started a new family somewhere else. She's not dead. She's not even missing. She's just gone, right? And you're like, when does that happen? That doesn't happen. Well, guess what? Sometimes it does.
Every once in a long while, it does. Yeah. So she up and left. And of course, the impact of that is huge on her children. It's one thing for an adult to go through that. The husband can kind of process it and grieve and move on. But as a child, there's no way for you to not blame yourself and wonder what happened and wish for her to come back and all these other things that are just deeply emotionally painful for children. So you've got to anticipate that the children are going to have some sort of issues going forward. Yeah. Best case scenario, we can get them into therapy, but that's the best way to move forward from this kind of stuff. So Chris and his sister Danielle moved in with their maternal grandmother first. Then a few years later, they were sent to live with their paternal grandparents, Joy and Joe Sr., in South Carolina. So not only is it very strange to me that the mother completely abandoned the family, but it's next level when not even the father could care for the kids, right?
Yeah, definitely.
This means there's something majorly wrong that had been going on in the home.
Just these two sets of grandparents with these kids just going back and forth, because there's more than one. Just going back and forth from like state to state, city to city, just different family to family. And I'm sure they talk, but what the hell?
Yeah, these kids were moved around so much because eventually their dad moved to Florida. So they'd spend some time in Florida, then they'd go to South Carolina, then they'd go to their other grandma's house. I mean, they were bounced around. And as a kid, the only way to interpret that really is that something's wrong with you, that's why you're being sent all these different places.
There's just no structure at all. And there's no way to make a routine.
No, you can't have any consistency,
any
get comfortable, make friends, Luckily, they had each other, brother and sister, they can hang out. But if you're going to a new city all the time, you can't really make long-term relationships. You're just ripped out from different schools and different, social scenes over and over and over again. So it's really sad. And again, to me, it just speaks of something was going wrong in that house. The mom had to leave. The dad didn't want to raise the kids. There's something wrong with the dad, is what that tells me.
That whole thing, there's a big question mark.
Yes. As a young child, Chris was extremely well behaved and shy. He was described as very, very timid, especially when you first met him. And to me, again, this speaks of maybe being severely punished or maybe afraid of adults or afraid of repercussions for his actions. So he kind of turned inward and tried to be as invisible as possible. That's what I gather from that. But once he became comfortable with people, he could be really lighthearted and funny, but it just took him a minute or two to warm up to people. He wasn't going to let his guard down easily.
Well, also he's gone, he's met so many people and why bother every time?
That's probably true. I didn't think about that. Yeah. I mean, what's the point of really making new friends? Because in a month from now, you're going to be gone.
Yeah.
Chris's family describes him as very thoughtful and caring towards his loved ones. His grandma even recalls how he used to pick flowers and give them to his family members. He seemed like a very sweet kid.
I mean, that's a kid.
Not all kids are that sweet.
I guess.
Some kids have to be told, like, hey, you go do this thing for your sister. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay.
From what I understand, he did it very naturally. Like, oh, I'm just outside playing. I could be just playing with trucks, but instead I'm going to pick flowers and give them to my sister. That's what they made it seem to be. But again, rose-tinted glasses by family members looking back, you know?
What a nice boy.
Right? Hopefully. That's what they say.
Sure.
He never had any disciplinary issues or got in trouble at school. He wasn't combative with any of the kids or anything. He was really, really well behaved. While the kids were staying with their grandparents, his father, Joe, moved on to other relationships. And reportedly, he has a total of 3 divorces, including Christopher's mother.
Something's up.
All these things that I'm bringing up, I'm just pointing to, like, something's wrong with the dad. We weren't there. We didn't witness it, but all signs point to he's not a great husband or father. When he got remarried, Chris and his sister Danielle moved back in with him in Florida. But it didn't last long. And soon they were sent back to their paternal grandparents' home once again.
A lot of parents do this when they've been absentee for a long time, and they come in and they're like, I'm going to take you now. I'm going to take you and you're going to live with me. And, you know, we're going to live this family life that we've never had ever. And it doesn't work out. And it's so sad because you see people just they're all into this relationship working out. They're going to live with them and now they're going to fix it all. You know, it just never works out. If it does, that's great. There's your example.
Right. I feel like they have the best intentions.
Yeah.
You know, but once there's this cycle of women coming in and out, the kids are going to different places, you know, you can rely on the grandparents to take them whenever you're just kind of done with parenting. And so why continue and try and rebuild your family? You know, I don't think there was much incentive for him when he could just be a part-time dad and go around dating new women all the time.
They made it really easy for him.
Exactly. There were some accusations that his father was abusive to the children, and it's unclear if he was violent towards his partners. But from the children's accounts, he did paddle them. He did, you know, use corporal punishment. According to his father, Joe, he claims that he was never physically or emotionally abusive, but he did admit to making a paddle to keep in the house and then threatened to use it on the kids if they misbehaved.
Yeah, we used that. Right? Like, come on. You don't just make it to threaten people with it.
I feel like this is a common thing when people do something terribly wrong, right?
Yeah.
They try and minimize it and they won't say, oh, I didn't, or X, Y, and Z. Like, you know, that's completely untrue, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people will like admit to these half truths. Like, oh, I made a paddle. It was just because the psychology of knowing that it's possible for me to use it would keep them in line, but I never used it. But according to the children, that's just not the case. And I don't know. I just don't believe someone that is going to make a paddle. You know what I mean?
Completely.
I'd never do it. I can't imagine any of my friends making a paddle to use on their kids and just like hanging it up in the living room, pointing at it if they don't do what they're told, you know?
Yeah, not at all.
It doesn't make any sense. But that's what he said. He claims no abuse was in the house. It was just, you know that you're going to get the paddle if you do something wrong. So take that however you want to take it.
All right.
As you could imagine, Chris and his sister Danielle had a very uncertain, unstable home life with an absent mother and this revolving door of women in his father's life. As his home life became more unstable and unpredictable, his demeanor started changing. Chris became way more withdrawn and sad as time went on. His emotional state improved when their mother came back in the year 2000, when Chris was 11 years old. He was really excited their family was all back together, and the kids were just ecstatic to have their mother back and their family unit intact.
That's not how this works.
No.
You don't just come back
And everything's
now
fine.
Take control of people you've never controlled, right? And you're in charge and you're the mom, but you have, she has never been there. And what happened that you are now back and engaged and wanting to have something to do with your children that you abandoned like 8 months after? Crazy, like really young, really young.
Yeah, it really opens up a lot of questions for me. Was Joe Jr. pursuing her this entire time? And just, every time something fell apart with his wives was just like, you're the one, blah, 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 you're the one that got away. Or did they like something stupid, run into each other at the supermarket and they're like, hey, time's passed. I'm not as resentful anymore. Let's like go get a drink. We really don't know what happened here. And I don't know what it would take to make me come back to a person that I had left that severely. You know what I mean? You have to think the situation was bad enough to where she just completely abandoned them. What could have improved, or what could have he promised that would make her believe that coming back would be safe?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just a lot to take in. I don't know what to make of that. But that he must have promised her the sun and moon and stars.
Of course.
But the reconciliation did not last long, and they broke up again in 2001. So, it was a matter of months before it turned toxic. Whatever their original problems were, they came back.
Oh, you mean it didn't go away?
Nope. That's why I'm always, maybe I'm a little bit nutty, but your friends always come to you for advice and blah, blah, blah. I'm that person that 100% of the time says an ex is an ex for a reason. You never go back. It's not worth it. I don't even care if you're just like booty calling it. It's not worth it at all. Move on. It's the best thing for you. It's never going to get better. Your issues are still going to exist. So clearly, this is further proof of that.
It's very good friend advice.
Chris took the news really hard, and his mental state took a sharp turn for the worse. He ran away from home shortly after the separation, and he attempted to get to his paternal grandparents, Joe and Joy's house. So Chris had always seen his grandparents' home as this safe and stable environment where he could just be a happy kid. Of all the places that he'd been bounced around to, it was Joy and Joe Sr. that were the best home for him. His grandparents' loving home was the first place that he wanted to go when his parents split up.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. He had thrived there. He had been happy. It's normal. That's where he would want to go. So he grabbed a few items, he left a note, and then he departed from his home and headed towards his grandparents' house. Again, they're in Florida. He's heading towards South Carolina. It's a lot for an 11-year-old kid, but he's trying.
He's got big dreams. And obviously this is a kid that has nobody ever telling him no or like, hey, that's not a good idea. This is just a kid that just does what he wants. At 11 years old, he packs up and starts walking to South Carolina.
Right.
He's on a walkabout. Like, what's he doing? He's running away. And he's probably planned this out for at least an hour.
Can I tell you funny story?
Yes.
I ran away once. I was like 3.
Okay.
And I had gotten in trouble for something. And I guess my dad spanked me. Like, they never did that, but I got a spanking. And I was like, oh, hell no. I'm going to a women's shelter. I'm getting the fuck out of here. No man treats me like this. Like, in a whole 3-year-old body with all my attitude, I was like, nope, this ain't going to happen. So I packed up a little like bag of toys and I made it to the end of the block.
Did you turn around and come back, or did your mom go get her? Go get
They got
you?
me.
They came and got you. Got it.
I think they probably watched me walk, you know what I mean? And we're just like, she's not going far. And then when I got to the end of the block and couldn't cross the street for myself, because of course I was taught not to, they were like, come back. And I came home. From what I know, that's what happened.
I think everybody's got a running away story, because I have one that's very similar as well.
Really?
Yeah, my mom says that it got too quiet. Suddenly, like, the house was quiet. That obviously means Courtney's doing something she's not supposed to be, right? That applies today. As soon as there's silence, Court from the other room, always. So she poked her head out the front door, and I was already like just hauling ass running, just in a diaper with shoes on. That was it. And just from behind, and I just knew I was just running, just shaking my ass. And I knew if I fell, it was over. So she said that I was just hauling. And then I fell, and then she took a picture of me, and this picture still exists.
Because that's more important than getting you inside. Like, let's document this.
This was a film camera, by the way. You had to go to Kodak.
Oh, I knew.
Right? Like,
you had to develop it at Thrifty.
So I think it's really funny that there is a picture right after I took off and tried to run away from home. I was like 2. Just started, like, was not seasoned at walking.
And, you know, like, those stories are funny for just very, very, very small children. But 11 years old, you're still not that mature, you know? You're not going to be able to get all the way to another state.
I feel like at 11, you just go to your room and close the door and listen to music.
Right. You just blast your music. Yeah.
Runaways are 3 and 17.
Right.
You know?
Just kind of 11's the in-between stage where not many people seem to be running away.
They're out there, but yeah, you know, this is more of a slam the door. Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
You're so controlling.
But it's just, you know, tough to imagine what his mental state would have been as an 11-year-old thinking, I'm going to get to another state, you know, leaving a note and just taking off. And, you know, that's crazy. He was just completely heartbroken and had so much grief about the fact that the family he really wanted to be together was breaking apart again. And his mom was leaving and abandoning them again. So, I mean, he was so emotional, he just had to leave. I feel really sorry for him. So, since he left a note before he left the house, his sister found it really soon after he left. And pretty soon after that, people went out searching for him very quickly, actually, which was surprising because usually you report things, everything lags. But I think that they just gathered a few friends and maybe he knew someone that was a cop. Who knows? But the cops jumped on it, which is very surprising. He made it only 15 miles away before police actually found him, and they brought him back to his father's house.
That's a long, 15 miles. I wonder if he was on a bike or if he walked 15 miles.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure, but it is far to make it for a little kid. But also, I'm surprised that it happened so quickly that the cops jumped on it and were like, okay, we're going to go canvass the streets and see if we can find him. That's very surprising to me. Back at home, Chris went on an emotional downward spiral and he became desperate to escape his terrible home life. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and announced to his sister that he'd rather die than live in their house.
I mean, we've all hated our parents' house.
Yeah, but
we were all 11, you know, we're all angry, but there's a difference, you know, and it's like, you know, this whole, how do you know if someone's serious and they see something, say something and all this, but like, what do you do back then? My brother's tripping. What do you say?
It's just so clear in this particular case where you see all of these other factors. There's no way to not think this boy is severely suffering. He means it. He doesn't want to live like this. And that's very sad that he's been pushed to this place because of the actions of all the adults around him that have failed him. So after he threatened to kill himself, his father took him to the hospital so he could receive treatment for his mental health. And this is just like a ding, 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 it's a win. I think that most parents are really hesitant to get mental health care for their children. It's hard enough as an adult to go through the therapy process and psychiatry and be open with people about doing it. It's still very stigmatized. So especially in children, I mean, that's a big deal that he was like, we need to get you mental health treatment. I think that that's really awesome. This is the one thing that he did right.
It's the dad, yeah, that takes him.
Yep.
Interesting.
The doctors diagnosed him with mild chronic depression in addition to defiant and negative behavior. The psychiatrist decided to also put him on Paxil in hopes that it would help him overcome some of his negative and difficult feelings. Christopher didn't appear to have any side effects from the medication, and there were no reports that he had adverse reactions to being on the new psych meds. In addition to taking medication and talking to a psychiatrist, they ended up admitting him to the hospital so that the staff could just make sure that his depression was under control, he was in a safe environment, and he wasn't a danger to himself.
I remember when Paxil came out, it was just all Paxil commercials all the time. Just on the television, constantly. I haven't seen those in a long time. I asked you earlier.
Right.
What happened to Paxil? What happened to that stuff? And
you said it like it was a celebrity I should have known of. Like,
yeah.
Whatever happened to Leif Garrett?
Where's Richard Simmons? Yeah, that one too. I looked it up. It's still prescribed. It's a generic. Like, it's all there. It's just...
Yeah, it's just there's so many new drugs that come out that maybe there's just more options. So the number of prescribing Paxil goes down when all these other options come into play. I think that's my theory.
That's
right?
Correct.
While receiving treatment and starting Paxil, he seemed to be acting normally for a child going through a tumultuous time. He was, a bit shut down and emotional, but he had no behavior that was extreme or concerning. He just exhibited, basic signs of depression. He was struggling, having a tough time. After only a week, his father decided to discharge him, and he took him to his grandparents' house in Chester, South Carolina. After all he did to get him help and mental health treatment, it seems very strange that he would discharge him early,
I was thinking the exact same thing. I wanted to see, how this played, it's so interesting that you cut it off and then you just drop him at the parents again.
Right. And that's the thing, is just I think he didn't want to deal with it. He just didn't want to keep moving forward with dealing with what he saw as, in quotes, a difficult child. He seems like he always wants the easy way out.
But the other thing, too, is this difficult child has issues because of you.
Right. He caused it.
Realistically, you're going to be the crux of the issue, right? Like abandonment, all these other things. So that might have been a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Maybe he gets into a therapy session and the whole thing is just shitting on him. He's feeling, right? Oh, they're attacking me or something.
Yeah. I, don't know what his mental state was at that point, but I would assume that he would have to feel some sort of guilt if they had family sessions and he learns that he needs to change his behavior, be a more attentive father, be more invested and involved in what's going on in Chris's life. Maybe he's just yeah, I'm not going to do that. Fuck that, I'm out. It seems like that's the case.
Finding the right pros for home projects can be tough and spark a lot of questions like, how do I find a pro who can help? Will they do a good job? Will I get a fair price? That's where HomeAdvisor can help. From leaky faucets to major remodels, HomeAdvisor connects you to the right pro for the job in seconds and even helps you get a fair price. Read reviews, check project cost guides, and book appointments. Go to HomeAdvisor.com or download the free HomeAdvisor app to start your next project.
Capital One presents a 30-second audio tour of Ireland. Sheep, fairies, golf, charming castle, charming castle, charming castle, charming castle, charming castle.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You know you can actually go there when you use the Capital One Venture Card. You earn unlimited double miles on every dollar you spend on every purchase, which means you'll have plenty of miles to actually travel to Ireland. The Capital One Venture Card. What's in your wallet?
Capital One Bank USA, N.A.
When Chris moved in with his grandparents, Joy and Joe Sr., in October 2001, it really did seem like Joe Jr. was relying on his parents to just fix his son and provide that loving, stable home that he wasn't able to give himself.
That is what it feels like.
It just seems like the only logical conclusion. You know, he was trying to get him treatment, but he checked him out early and he's like, you guys deal with this. It's fucked up. When 12-year-old Chris arrived in South Carolina, his grandparents and close friends noticed that Chris was far more melancholy and withdrawn than he'd been during all his previous stays. It was noted that he was clearly sad, and specifically he avoided eye contact. But his grandparents were really determined to help him get better. So they planned to continue his mental health treatment with a local doctor. The physician described Chris as having lots of energy and observed that he was not a danger to himself. So apparently the suicidality that had originally brought him to the hospital was no longer present, which is an important thing for a psychiatrist to note in the charts, right?
Yeah, that's a very big difference.
Although he was suicidal at the time of his hospitalization, the doctor said, quote, specifically, he had no plans to harm himself and was not flying off the handle. So his condition had improved. Unfortunately, Paxil was not available near his grandparents' home in Chester, South Carolina. So this new doctor gave Chris samples of Zoloft instead.
This is when the little Zoloft commercial come in.
Right.
Remember the ones? It was like the two O's were wheels on a car.
I do.
And it was blue because the dark depression is blue and usually in commercials. And it would drive along the little Zoloft mobile. And the two O's were the wheels. That's what I remember.
At the time, Zoloft was one of the most widely prescribed SSRI antidepressants prescribed for both adults and children. So let's get into SSRIs just briefly for a second.
Let's do it.
So SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, treat depression by stopping the reabsorption, aka reuptake, of serotonin, therefore increasing their levels in the brain. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter associated with feelings of well-being or happiness. So basically, SSRIs increase mood stability by increasing serotonin levels. At the time, Zoloft was one of many common antidepressants which hadn't been specifically approved for children, although there were definitely a lot of doctors prescribing it to children. In 2000, studies revealed a possible link between aggressive behavior and hallucinations in children and teens taking Zoloft, Paxil, and Prozac. Although SSRIs have helped so many people, including children, treating your mental health is really a challenging endeavor that requires the kind of awareness and diligence that, in my opinion, would be difficult for a lot of children to have.
No, you have to have parents just to take you to the appointments.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
So, some kids may not be able to tell if the meds maybe aren't working or be able to communicate what they're experiencing, if they're having side effects. They just, aren't fully progressed to adulthood, where adults may be a little bit more capable of doing those things. So because with that said, it's extremely important for the parents and a physician to pay extremely close attention to how the child is responding to the medication.
This is a bummer because we know his parents aren't even concerned with where he physically is living, at the time.
Exactly. That's my point by pointing that out, is just like, you need to have diligent parents, and that's not what he has.
Not at all. It's so sad.
Yeah. Luckily, Christopher was originally doing well when he started taking Paxil for several days while he was in the hospital. But even though he'd responded well to one SSRI, does not mean that transitioning to Zoloft would be the same. Although both drugs are SSRIs, it's generally advised to wean off of one medication and then slowly start another one with close monitoring for side effects. That's the best way to do it. It's the most responsible, and it's going to cause the least amount of chaos in your life. You can't just be taking a high dose, stop one day, and start a new medication at a high dose the same day.
I mean, the doctor gave him the samples. You would hope that he would have said this to him. Some sort of titration schedule, something along these lines, right?
Yeah, you would hope so. Like, hey, take a half of pill for the next 2 days and then a quarter pill for the next 2 days and then start on a half a pill of the new medication. You would hope that there would be some instruction like that. But that's not what happened here at all. Chris was neither weaned off the previous medication, nor was he slowly tapered on to Zoloft. Almost immediately after starting to take Zoloft, Chris started to experience extreme side effects. He became numb and desensitized, which he would later describe as not having any feelings. His older sister Danielle described his behavior as manic.
Those are very different things.
I know. That's why I am including these, because I'm like, there's a lot of conflicting reports where he seems very numb. People are saying he's kind of unresponsive. He's very subdued. But at other times, he is completely uncontrollable, freaking out, having outbursts, being manic. And these things don't really add up. But he was exhibiting both behaviors. Which to me, again, if you're an adult monitoring your own sort of transition to a medication, you're like, something's not right. This isn't my personality. These aren't my feelings. Let me go back to the doctor.
Well, also a kid doesn't really have self-awareness in that sense, to know what they look like on the outside to other people. He maybe was acting crazy, but he thought he was just totally baseline normal.
Absolutely. I don't think that he would be able to interpret or articulate what's going on and how it felt different or wrong, His sister would say that he started many sentences at once and then he wouldn't complete them. She explained it as, quote, "It was like his mind was moving faster than he could talk."
Been there.
I was going to say, this just sounds like court all the time.
Not today, but I've lived in that space for a long time.
Right. Chris also started to experience a burning sensation all over his body that became severe enough to require pain medication.
I mean, it sounds like this. You take him to the hospital.
It sounds like he's having a severe
allergic
reaction.
Yeah.
Something's not right. So they tried this. His grandparents took him back to the doctor who originally prescribed the new Zoloft and started describing these side effects. But completely shockingly, the doctor increased his dosage from 100 milligrams daily to 200 milligrams daily, which is insane to me.
That's a lot to just double overnight.
Right?
Instead of tapering up, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's already having such insane side effects. And I know there's, some medications, I am aware that if you increase the dosage, the side effects change. I've heard of this. Okay, you're going to have, tummy problems at 50 milligrams, but then at 100 milligrams, you're going to have insomnia. I know that the side effects change. But he's a child. It's a very delicate thing. I would say, even as his grandparents, when you hear the doctor say that, be like, you know what, I'm not really comfortable with him taking the medication anymore. I think that we need to try something else. Maybe we can drive to the state line and go get Paxil again because that was working, you know? So I really wish that his grandparents would have stood up at this point and said, I know you're the doctor, but maybe I need a second opinion, or I know more firsthand because I'm there day to day and I don't agree with your change in medication. I wish that they would have just stood up and said something and pushed back on his direction, you know?
And it's not slighting his grandparents. It's not necessarily their responsibility, but it's like there needs to be some sort of adult, kind of like a case manager, you know?
Yes.
Managing, helping with this. And there's just not.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's definitely not that I'm saying it's their fault or blaming them. I just so desperately wish that something had gone differently during this interaction. You know what I mean? If something had gone differently and they would have changed the medication, lowered the dose to 50 instead of doubling it, you know, there's plenty of other things that maybe could have helped Chris and his family after this, you know? I wish that it would have gone a different way. So an increase in dosage does increase the potential for different side effects, which include aggressive behavior, hallucinations, paranoia, aggravated depression, delusion, amnesia, abnormal dreams, and in extreme cases, it will induce manic episodes. So clearly, he started experiencing some of this. From Chris's description of the experience, as well as the observations of his loved ones, it seemed that he was experiencing major side effects from the high dose of Zoloft, as well as possible withdrawal from Paxil. Because remember, this is all happening within the short span of a few days.
So much medicine going through you.
Yeah. In addition to the emotional struggles and the physical side effects, Chris began lashing out at those around him. On November 28th, 2001, he got into a verbal argument on the school bus with a younger child, which escalated to a physical fight where he choked this small boy.
Wow.
Chris had never had a history of violence, no fights, no animal cruelty. This was completely out of character for him. It's very shocking, especially to those that knew him.
It's like it was just a slow burn, quiet buildup.
A few hours after getting home from school that day, his grandparents took him to an evening service at their church. During the musical portion, Chris was repeatedly kicking the piano player's bench while they were playing. Joe and Joy kept reprimanding him and trying to kind of control his behavior so he wouldn't disrupt the service. But Chris just kept kicking the piano player. When it became clear that he just would not stop, they decided to just leave the service early and take him home. Varying accounts detail how Chris was disciplined with a spanking or a threat to be sent back to his father if he didn't behave, or both.
Probably both.
People definitely within the church observed that he was getting in a lot of trouble as they were leaving. After he was sent to bed that night of November 28th, 2001, Chris just laid there growing more angry by the minute. He clearly had a higher level of agitation because of the medication, which amplified his rage about being disciplined and the despair at this prospect of being returned back to his abusive father.
Yeah, you tell kids stuff, they take that on.
It feels so heavy for a child.
we're going to send, they're just like talking out loud. They're not making promises. They're just saying like, we've thought about it, we're threatening you with it. That's it. But to him, this isn't the kid that you threaten and, that kind of thing. You probably can't even really joke with this one.
Right. Yeah. He seems like at this point, especially, that he's a very serious kid. And I think, now in more recent years, we're really giving a lot more weight to the fact that children have such deep emotions. But, back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, children are to be seen, not heard. They follow directions. Adults make the decisions. Kids just go along with it. We don't care about their feelings. They just have to do what they're told, right? As the grandparents that are not one but two generations removed, I think they were probably the kind of parental figures that are like, hey, you eat what we cook. We're not making any sort of changes for you. You do what we say that you're going to do. If there is a chore to do, you're going to complete it in X amount of time. I think that they're from that era. And so they weren't necessarily, in my opinion, making plans to send him back to the father, but they're just trying to hold him accountable and discipline him and change his behavior by saying that they're going to do that. But like you said, for a kid, this feels just end of the world, catastrophic. This feels like the worst thing that could ever happen. And we now in 2019 are much better at acknowledging that kids experience these really deep feelings and it really deeply affects them and fucks them up, to be honest, So yeah, he's just sitting in his room, heartbroken and terrified that he's going to have to go back to his dad. It also seems likely that he felt pretty heartbroken and hopeless because he had previously viewed his grandparents' house as an escape from abuse. But now that he was back with them, he'd faced more discipline and corporal punishment from them, who he had never expected it from, right? So it feels like he just left one abusive situation to go to another one.
Probably feels really betrayed by them too.
Exactly. As his rage was bubbling up, he also says that he began hearing voices that instructed him to kill his grandparents.
This is never a good sign. This is always where it comes in, right here. And it's how old? He's a teenager. He's like young teens, male. Not good.
Yeah, he's only 12 years old at this point. So he retrieved a shotgun, which he had been taught how to use previously, and brought it up to their bedroom. He aimed the gun at their heads and fired a total of 4 shots. His grandfather was hit at such a close range that his teeth were shattered and the shot got trapped in the back of his skull. After the murders, Chris went around the house meticulously placing stacks of paper near candles. Chris found $33, took the guns, grabbed their family dog, and fled the scene in his grandparents' vehicle. As he was leaving the house, the candles burned down to light the paper that he had staged, and the home went up in flames.
That's a really artistic looking way to end a crime scene.
It's an elaborate thing.
It's very
for
elaborate.
A 12-year-old to do.
It's very, how you come up with that?
Yeah. But again, it makes you wonder, just like, if you're thinking about him not being in control of his behavior, he's hallucinating, he's hearing voices, yet he's still with it enough to plan out this house fire, stage it, set everything up, and make it happen. So it's just important to think of like, well, his mental state was in this place because of the medication, but he was also between all the hallucinations, hearing the voices, still able to come up with this plan and make it happen.
And he's only 12.
Only 12.
The whole time. He's 12.
By the time firefighters were able to get the blaze under control, the house was gone, and the bodies of Joe and Joy were found. Neighbors and friends from church knew that the Pittman's grandson was staying with them, so they immediately alerted law enforcement that 12-year-old Chris was supposed to be inside the house. They started searching for him, but when investigators were unable to find evidence that Chris was in the house, they feared that he had been kidnapped. Chris made it about 40 miles away until his grandparents' SUV got stuck in a wooded area.
Finding the right pros for home projects can be tough and spark a lot of questions like, how do I find a pro who can help? Will they do a good job? Will I get a fair price? That's where HomeAdvisor can help. From leaky faucets to major remodels, HomeAdvisor connects you to the right pro for the job in seconds and even helps you get a fair price. Read reviews, check project cost guides, and book appointments. Go to HomeAdvisor.com or download the free HomeAdvisor app to start your next project.
At Metro, the best deal in wireless is on. Switch to Metro and get one full Amazon Prime membership included every month. Plus, get 2 free phones from top brands like Samsung and LG with huge HD screens. All with 2 lines for just $90. That's the best deal in wireless, only at Metro. Plus sales tax and activation fee. Requires port-in of eligible number not currently active on T-Mobile network or active on Metro in past 90 days. Limit 4 per account or household. Offer subject to change. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Amazon Prime has a $12.99 per month value. Restrictions apply. See store for details and terms and conditions.
A short time later, 2 hunters found him at around 10 a.m. while they were on their way out into the woods.
I guess they could be looking for the grandparents' car, but he's got a head start. So he's on his way, and then he's just like thinking he's going to live a off the grid life. What do you think?
Maybe.
When you're 12, right?
Right.
You're going to run away. You got your backpack. You got your peanut butter and jelly, your toys, whatever you pack, right? And you take off. And I'm always just like, where are you going? What are you doing? What's the goal? It's like the Slender Man girls. They were in Wisconsin. They killed the chick. Don't quote me on Wisconsin. But the castle they were supposed to go to was in Illinois, and they were going to walk there.
Yeah, we could just walk to Illinois.
Right? Like,
yeah.
Your prefrontal lobe is not fully formed.
But one of the things that stands out about this to me is the SUV was in the woods. So I don't know if that's just an accident or he pulled over to just get some sleep. But in my mind, there is a possibility that he knew cops were looking for him. He knew that the license plate would be out there. So maybe he could just pull off into the woods and not have the car found by police and just buy himself a little bit of time.
That's probably what it is.
I'm just, trying to think of why he would just be in the woods like that, But then again, like I said, he could have just gotten tired and pulled over because he had to take a nap. Who knows? When the hunters found him, Chris immediately told them that a black guy had killed his grandparents, then brought him to this remote area. The hunters were really struck by his lack of emotion. It seemed really odd that he would be so calm if he'd just witnessed a double murder and been kidnapped. It just immediately didn't seem right to them.
Yeah, it wouldn't at all.
He would be freaking out, which is just for him to not have any reaction and say it so matter-of-factly. Immediately, the hunters were like, let's tell the police this doesn't seem right. You
have to.
Yeah.
I mean,
when the police arrived, Chris told them the same story about being kidnapped by a black man and brought to the woods. And this, for me, is just the first thing I thought was, why does the guy have to be black? Is this just underlying deep-seated racism of criminal equals black or bad men equals black? I feel like there's got to be something maybe in his family or whatever sort of messaging he's receiving that's just this deep-seated underlying racism that he doesn't even realize is going on,
Yeah, I think you're right.
You hear this, wasn't it? What was the girl that staged her own kidnapping a while back and said it was Mexican men, but then it turned out to be fake? I don't remember her name, but I feel like that's something that happens when people are faking any sort of crime, coming up with an excuse or an alibi or whatever, and blaming it on someone else. They're always bringing race up, and it just gets under my skin. I just don't know how to properly articulate it, but it just drives me crazy. It speaks volumes about how these white people are viewing minorities, and it breaks my heart.
I agree with your analysis on this case.
It's just,
For
as
sure.
an 11-year-old to already be like racially profiling. I mean, the fuck is that? It's just very sad. So I don't know. I just wanted to point that out. It's one thing to say like, oh yeah, I was kidnapped, blah, blah, blah. But he specifically pointed out the person was black. And that's deeply upsetting and unsettling to me. So after he initially weaved this story at the scene where he was found, officers decided to take him back to the station because they needed to get more information from him. When they pushed Chris a bit more and asked him additional questions, he initially started weaving this elaborate story. Detectives also recall that he was calm, he didn't seem nervous at all. They said that he didn't appear to be manic or psychotic during the interviews.
I mean, he's just retelling the story, but it's different every time, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like he's just coming up with new elaborate details as time goes on because he thinks that's going to make it more real. But also them pointing out that he didn't seem manic or psychotic. Maybe it's just the meds keeping him really subdued, you know?
Yeah.
That it's like, well, of course he's calm. He's highly medicated. He's got a double dose of this medication. So maybe it's just he's almost incapable of having an extreme reaction or not being calm. I'm not sure. It's just, I got to believe that the medication has to be a little bit of a factor in this consistent description of how calm he is.
Yeah, that's so true. What a good point.
As the hours went by, his story started unraveling. And by the early evening, Chris finally admitted that he'd been the one to kill his grandparents. When describing the events, Chris explained that it felt like a dream or something that he was watching on TV that he couldn't stop. He could recall everything that happened that night, so he went into great detail describing the voices he heard, the gunshots, the blood, and even hearing the smoke detector sound as he was leaving the house. Although he was calm and didn't seem to exhibit signs of psychosis, he did say that his grandparents deserved what they got.
That's bullshit. It's like, there's so much to be said, but you don't have to say anything because I feel like anybody who's with us that's been listening to Brianna talk basically knows that like these grandparents went above and beyond.
They did everything they could to give him the best possible childhood considering the circumstances.
And not only that, like, you know, obviously they raised his father, so they've done that already. Now they have the grandkid and they're doing that. They don't need to, you know, it's like another one of the, I always feel really bad, but I know that grandparents love their grandchildren, so it is what it is. But so they're going to go ahead and raise their grandchild now, right? And they've done everything for this kid. And for this kid to say that they deserved it, if I had been in that family or like a family friend or like Joy's best friend, right? Oh my God. And you know what they've gone through for that kid. Can you imagine?
Yeah, they've made the sacrifices. You're supposed to be retired. You're supposed to like get a Winnebago and do all these road trips, you know, and then show up and take the kids to like an amusement park and be the fun grandparents. But instead, for years, back and forth, you are raising 2 children when you're supposed to be in retirement age.
Yeah, you did this already, you know?
And it's a sacrifice. And some people love raising kids. So I'm not trying to say, you know, everybody looks at it like a burden. But I'm just saying it did affect their later years where they're supposed to chill out, do more self-care, focus on themselves and do some of the things they've always wanted to do in life. But instead, they're raising another generation of 2 kids, So for him, like you said, to say something so terrible that they deserved this when all they did was give everything to these 2 kids, it's just really, really sad. Chris was charged with his grandparents' murder and sent to a juvenile facility. He was only 12 years old at the time. The trial didn't start until 3 years later, and in the meantime, Chris was bounced from one facility to another. He was still struggling with his mental health, had still seemed to have manic episodes, and he even used several racial slurs against a prison guard.
Now he's just going to be institutionalized.
Yeah.
Got it.
And again, just underlying racism. I knew it was there, but it's just, this fucking kid. I want to be on his side because of how hard his life was, but then there's so many things where I'm just like, oh my God, you're a murderer and you're saying these awful things and you're exhibiting signs of definitely some racism. I mean, hey, you think your grandparents deserve what they got? I mean, fuck you, kid.
That's exactly what I was thinking too.
I want to have compassion, but you're making it impossible.
His grandparents wanted to have compassion too.
Right. And look where it got them.
Exactly.
While he was awaiting trial, the media and the public were intensely debating what role the medication had played in this crime. His father was in the spotlight, adamantly blaming Zoloft for his son's actions. In 2004, the FDA held a hearing on the safety of Zoloft use in children specifically. Testimony was given from doctors, pharmaceutical company reps, and many parents whose children had experienced severe side effects. Most of the parents at the hearing shared stories of how their children committed suicide soon after beginning to take the drug. Joe testified about the murders and even read a letter from Chris about how he knew what was happening that night, but was unable to control his actions.
It's not what you want to hear read out loud, ever.
Right. But it seems that they weren't really the only family that have been so affected by this, although it was definitely way more common that the children had attempted or committed suicide. He was one of the few ones that had violent acts towards others, but there was a lot of people coming forward telling similar stories of how things had gone really terribly immediately after taking Zoloft. The hearing also revealed that the drug companies had not published all the data gathered during pediatric trials of the medication, which is fucking infuriating. At least make the information available. Let the psychiatrist prescribing this know what can happen and what to look out for. It's so irresponsible that they did that.
All these drug companies have histories like this.
Yeah.
There's a case for each one.
Absolutely. They're just some of the worst criminals and murderers are drug companies. That hearing also served as a public forum for grieving parents to testify about children who had committed suicide soon after they started antidepressants. The FDA did not conclude that the drug directly caused those side effects. However, they did require that the drug companies put a black box warning on the packages. And the black box warning would advise doctors and parents to look for signs of aggression, anxiety, agitation, and increased probability of suicidal behavior in children and teens. So they got a warning, but no real change.
The labels on the box thing is kind of funny to me too, because isn't it usually like if it says it's going to kill you, you want to buy it? Right, outright. If it's on the package, just like, will cause death. Give me 20 of them. I'll take a carton.
Ooh, danger.
Right? Yeah. Mother, may I sleep with danger? All of it.
Yeah, I mean, at least I'm trying to look at it in a positive light. Like, at least the psychiatrist now have more information. So maybe prescribing Zoloft to younger kids may have gone down after this because they know that there'd been this hearing. They know there's a black box warning, but still, it's not really taking responsibility for the amount of lives that have been ruined. And that's just extremely tragic. Leading up to Chris's trial, there were many questions about what the charges would be and which court would hear the case. If the trial went to family court, the longest he could be kept in custody would be until the age of 21. But in South Carolina, there is no minimum age for charging minors as adults.
That sentence is funny. Because it's like, well, you're a minor, you're not an adult. You can't be charged as an adult, but you're a minor, so you can. Like, what?
Right.
So bizarre.
There's no age limit, which is just so crazy. Although Chris was only 12 years old at the time of his murder, and 15 at the time of the trial, the prosecution decided to try Chris as an adult. A 12-year-old.
Yeah, I was like, he's effectively ending his life with that ruling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just so sad. They also decided to charge him with murder instead of manslaughter, although they declined to seek the death penalty since the Supreme Court has not approved the execution of anyone that young. So they could have given him, lesser charges, but if you're looking at a murder charge, the minimum sentence for a guilty verdict is 30 years. And again, 2 people died, both grandparents, so he's facing 60 years, as opposed to the possibility of being tried in family court, where he'd spend, 9 years, but still get out at 21 and be able to kind of have a life.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you reason that and, do the math and all this on that. I mean, once you rule they're an adult, it becomes easy, right? But then the whole ruling is the question. It's just what they decide that day, right?
Yeah, it just seems like a lot to me that they went with the toughest of every option. Do you know what I mean? So instead of family court, it's regular court. Instead of being tried as a kid, they're tried as an adult. Instead of doing manslaughter, we're looking at murder. In every single way possible, they went for the biggest penalty, the worst consequences. The only break they gave him was not seeking the death penalty because they couldn't, because it wasn't allowed in the state. What if it was allowed?
Yeah, they would have killed him.
It's just insane to me. That seems like a lot. I could understand, going for certain charges or taking it to family court, but having a more extreme stipulate. I don't know, whatever you could do, but it seemed like there was no middle ground here. And I understand I'm coming off as way overly sympathetic. I understand I'm not trying to just let him go out on the streets or not hold him accountable. I know that he needs to experience consequences and be put in a facility. I get why he needs to be off the streets, at least for a little while. But I just feel like everything went wrong for this kid. And now we're going to punish him to the most extreme. And it just seems tragedy upon tragedy. I really struggle with that.
Well, I don't think you sound too sympathetic. Just so you know.
The prosecution initially offered a plea deal, but Chris's defense attorneys chose to fight and go to trial because they really wanted a not guilty verdict. Pfizer, the maker of Zoloft, stepped in to provide information and assistance to the prosecutor, John R. Justice.
Finding the right pros for home projects can be tough and spark a lot of questions like, how do I find a pro who can help? Will they do a good job? Will I get a fair price? That's where HomeAdvisor can help. From leaky faucets to major remodels, HomeAdvisor connects you to the right pro for the job in seconds and even helps you get a fair price. Read reviews, check project cost guides, and book appointments. Go to HomeAdvisor.com or download the free HomeAdvisor app to start your next project.
At Metro, the best deal in wireless is on. Switch to Metro and get one full Amazon Prime membership included every month. Plus, get 2 free phones from top brands like Samsung and LG with huge HD screens. All with 2 lines for just $90. That's the best deal in wireless, only at Metro. Plus sales tax and activation fee. Requires port-in of eligible number not currently active on T-Mobile network or active on Metro in past 90 days. Limit 4 per account or household. Offer subject to change. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Amazon Prime has a $12.99 per month value. Restrictions apply. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Additional lawyers with experience going up against drug companies offered to help with Chris's defense, including Ann Blake Tracy, Arnold Vickery, and Karen Barth Menzies.
That's a real dream team.
Right.
That's a good idea, too.
And they're all people with just lots of experience. Yeah. And, I don't know if all of them, but I know at least 1 or 2 of them joined for free. So, they were really trying to get him off. They're like, no plea deal. We know that we've got the experience on this. We're going to get him a not guilty verdict. So all of these lawyers to form this team added years of experience going against pharmaceutical companies for their side effects and also defending people who were on psychiatric drugs at the time of their crime. Chris's family was hopeful because just a few months prior, Arnold Vickery had secured a not guilty verdict after arguing that Paxil had caused a man in Wyoming to commit murder.
I feel like I kind of remember vaguely all these drug companies were getting sued for all this really just ridiculous, crazy behavior that was going on while people were under the influence of these antidepressants that were prescribed by doctors. And this was early 2000s. Tons of these lawsuits. It's all clicking right now. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember this period of time.
Yeah. But coming off of that period of time, knowing that, a person on your team had a very recent victory, their family was going into this thinking, oh yeah, people will see Chris, this young kid, and think he's not capable of this on his own. It must have been the drugs. They were very hopeful, very optimistic heading into the trial. Although he was held in juvenile facilities leading up to the trial, the judge allowed him to be released on $175,000 bail during the trial. The only condition of his release was that he could not return to his home state of Florida. He had to stay in South Carolina. To make this possible, his maternal grandmother agreed to leave Florida and rent an apartment in South Carolina so he could establish residence and meet the condition of his bail.
This family really goes above and beyond for this guy.
Yes.
Again and again, the grandparents.
Exactly. And they had all contributed to raising him, And so one of the things that I saw is a clip of her talking about it. And, she was specifically asked, do you feel safe? His other grandparents were murdered by him. And she was just without a doubt, it was the medication. He's no longer taking that medication. I feel absolutely 100% safe around him. He would never harm any of us in his right mind. She was really, really coming to bat for him.
In his right mind. I don't know if that's a person that you wonder too, maybe the grandma has questions if you're at a party, should we let him drink at the barbecue? Right? He is swayed by substances, correct? To act a little bit different. If you're the I'm being the devil's advocate. If you're the grandmother, right? You may have concerns, but nope, she's just, we're good here. It was the meds.
Without a doubt. And he's still 15 at this point, so, and he doesn't know anybody there. It's not like he's going to be out every night. He's on bail. They're just going to keep him in the house.
Out on bail, living with grandma.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
It's important to point out, I think, that it's a very interesting detail that Chris's father chose not to relocate to South Carolina and did not attend the trial.
I mean, I doubt he really expected much out of him at this point.
Yeah.
It sucks.
I would hope not, but I just feel like all 11-year-olds think that, you know, they have the best hopes and anticipation that their family is going to show up for them.
Yeah.
Despite a lot of kids, despite any, like all this evidence historically that, you know what, mom and dad are not going to be here, or dad's a deadbeat, or mom's a drunk, or whatever, kids just always naturally think that this time it's not going to be that way. But yet again, he has failed his son. On Monday, January 31st, 2005, over 3 years after the murder, Chris's trial began. His legal team decided to use a variation of the insanity defense by claiming that he was involuntarily intoxicated while taking Zoloft. Involuntary intoxication diminishes criminal responsibility on the grounds that the defendant was intoxicated, but not by his own choice or consent. And therefore, they are not entirely responsible for crimes committed while intoxicated.
If you're directed by a doctor to take it, is it still you taking it on your own accord? Right? Even if you're a minor? Or is it involuntary when you say, like, you just have the blanket statement, say, like, oh, I didn't want to take this?
I think the intoxication comes in yes, the consumption of your own prescribed medication is voluntary. But when you complain about side effects and they get severe and you don't expect that, you become intoxicated by that drug. You're not having the normal reaction to this medication. But then I think it kind of became a bigger issue when the dosage was increased. Then I think they were insisting that that's why it's involuntary. You knew there was side effects. The original prescription was already causing problems. So then to double down on that, it becomes involuntary. The kid is just following directions, especially as a minor that's not really in control of all of this. It seems like an especially good argument for involuntary.
Got it.
But you're right. In most cases where involuntary intoxication comes in, it is 99% of the time we're talking about roofies, people spiking drinks at fraternity parties, that kind of thing. That's most commonly what the involuntary intoxication is. Or someone hands another person a joint, turns out there's PCP in it, and they do some crazy shit. That's, you know, almost always these types of cases that use involuntary intoxication as a defense. But this is one of those that focuses on medication. And there's a handful of them, but they're just not as common. The defense introduced studies showing links between Zoloft use and hallucinations, aggression, or suicidal behavior. Forensic psychiatrists Lynette Adkins and Richard Cabot both testified that taking Zoloft had caused Chris to have a psychotic episode. The cases of violence or murder are far less common than suicidality or minor side effects. The defense argued that this was one of those rare cases. It was just the extreme anomaly. The prosecution countered that Chris was simply angry at his grandparents for disciplining him and went into a tailspin at the thought that he might be sent back to his dad's house. So that's why he committed the murders.
I think that's probably a variation of it. Like, there's definitely truth to that. That's what was going on. But there's other things going on. I mean, those SSRIs are tough.
I think, it's hard for me. I'm seeing it as a middle ground kind of thing. I think that both are contributing factors. I think that from the cases that I've seen, even in the other Killer Kids episodes, you see kids retaliating because they are abused. And I remember a specific case that we talked about where the children had waited till the father was asleep and killed him because he was the abuser and they only felt safe when he was asleep, right? So I see this as a combination of everything happening. The side effects from medication are clearly a factor. In my mind, there's just no way around it. We know that children have these adverse reactions. And although it's not a high percentage, we still have to acknowledge that that exists, that there's other people observing. It's not just him saying, claiming, making up things, especially as an adult that might look back and say, ooh, I could use this defense. He's a kid that's like kind of minor self-reporting of what's going on with him, but everything else was observed by other people. So we know something was going wrong with him. But as a child, not only on medication, but also coming from a long-term history of neglect, abandonment, abuse, moving around, instability, not being able to count on people around him, he's going to have some severe emotional reactions to the possibility of being moved around again or to be physically punished with a paddling. So any of those things could set him off even if he wasn't on medication. So I think this is extremely hard for the jurors to take in all this information because I wouldn't know what to do. To me, it's both. Both arguments are right. The defense and the prosecution make clear points that make sense to me, and I believe were both factors. So I don't know what I would do if I was on that jury. But you're right. I mean, there's definitely some weight to that argument that he was mad at his grandparents. The prosecution tried to prove that because Chris had left Florida to escape his father's abuse, when his grandfather disciplined him, Chris just snapped. For the prosecution, the fact that he was on the medication was merely coincidental and not the cause of the murder. A forensic psychiatrist named Pamela M. Crawford and a psychiatrist named James Ballinger were both able to review the case and examine Chris before testifying for the prosecution. They both concluded that Chris's reasoning for killing his grandparents and efforts to conceal the crime afterwards proved that he was in control of his actions and also that he was aware that what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he's intoxicated, but he's not insane.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's intoxicated, but he's still doing things to show, I know that this is wrong. I'm going to try and hide it. Those are things that someone that is, in control of themselves would do. That's what they're arguing. Chris did not take the stand during the trial. Despite the studies presented and testimony of psychologists, the public, the media, and many jurors did not believe that the medication had inhibited his sense of right and wrong or play a role in the crime.
I could see a lot of people just not giving any credence to it,
Yes.
At all. Just the kid killed him. He was ungrateful, resented, whatever it may be. Daddy issues, all of it, and just killed him.
I also think that, again, we haven't made like that much progress, but we've made some progress. And, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, there wasn't as big of a conversation about mental health. And we still demonize mental health. Mm-hmm. We still stigmatize, people taking psych meds. So back in the early 2000s, I think that there's a lot of people in the public that just don't get it. That it's not enough of a conversation, that people aren't talking about the fact that they are in therapy or taking medication, whereas now people are trying to be more open and destigmatize. So that definitely plays a role. This overall public perception and trying to demonize, the drugs and the mental issues. That's definitely huge in the media and people's interpretation of the crime. On February 15th, 2005, after only 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict for both murders. Chris just silently looked down at the floor as the verdict was read. Before sentencing, Chris told the judge, quote, "I know it's in the hands of God. Whatever he decides on, that's what it's going to be."
Sounds like a good outlook, all things considered.
I guess.
I mean,
yeah, if
resigned yourself to your fate, he's not necessarily fighting, right?
He knows he's powerless.
Yeah.
It's going to be what it's going to be.
That's a pretty healthy state of mind, I think.
I mean, I would argue that it's the judge, not God. The judge listening was probably just like, it's not really in God's hands. I'm the one that's going to sentence you. But still, it seems like it speaks to his acceptance.
Yes.
Like, I know that I'm fucked. This is what's going to happen. It's sad, but he's just got to accept it. And yelling and screaming about it or having an outburst or whatever is not going to get him anywhere.
Yeah. He knows he did, if he did this, let's just, close this chapter.
Right.
Right.
In South Carolina, the minimum sentence is 30 years for a murder conviction. So, like I said earlier, that means he's facing 60 years. The maximum would be a life sentence. So he was also facing a, double life sentence. But Circuit Court Judge Danny Peter decided that the 30-year minimum for each murder would run concurrently. So he didn't get a 60-year sentence.
That's, nothing in this life is fair, right? But that makes more sense.
Yes. That was the minimum that he could give.
Yeah.
To do it concurrently and the minimum sentence, which is 30. So it's terrible. It's, for someone who did this at 12, that's, what does they say, like the best years of your life or something like that. He's going to come out middle-aged, having no employment history, no education. It's sad. It's very tragic.
Yeah, by the time he gets out, what do you do?
Right.
How do you you rebuild, I guess, right? That's what you do.
And that's one of the things about these crimes committed by children is you're going to see that every single time. Like, okay, you got 30 years. Okay, you got 40 years, but you're going to come out. Most of the people that you knew are going to be gone. Your family that's older than you may be deceased. It's just almost impossible to rebuild from there. So I don't know. It's hard for me to see this happen to such a young kid. And I know that what he did was wrong and stuff like that. But the whole time that I was reading this was thinking like, what would happen if this happened today when we have a little bit more conversation about mental health, a little bit more awareness and a tiny bit less stigma,
I don't think he would have gotten the sentence he did.
Yeah.
And South Carolina, if this is still the way it's going, we need a little reform, right? Maybe a thought about it, especially with juvenile offenders.
Yeah, I definitely think at minimum, if that's still going on, we need to raise that juvenile age for adult prosecution. It just seems very extreme to me. And hopefully we have a lot more studies on the side effects. We have a lot of information about mental health. I hope. But I think it would have been differently if it happened today. I don't necessarily think, he'd gotten away with it and been found not guilty, but I do think something would be different.
I agree.
Maybe they would have taken him to family court instead, or maybe they would have done the manslaughter charge. It's just, makes me think about what would have gone another direction had it been 2019. The defense attorney, Andy Vickery, said, "We're devastated. We're heartbroken. We're mystified that the state chose to treat a 12-year-old as an adult." The media reflected that many people did not agree with the extreme verdict and sentencing. A juror named Christine Peterson came forward to say that initially the jury was very divided on whether Zoloft was to blame. She also said that as a grandmother of a 12-year-old, she was one of the people who was very hesitant to return a guilty verdict for such a young child. Christine said, quote, "It bothered me a lot. It was not an easy decision, but everyone kept saying, look at the evidence, look at the evidence. I'm sure many of us had sleepless nights." 2 other jurors came forward to say that they felt pressured into agreeing on a guilty verdict. This seems like it's another one of those cases where they're getting into a room and they're like, we need to just get out of this room. We're done being on this jury. Let's agree on something so we can go home.
That always bugs me too when they come out after the fact and say this and they're just like, oh yeah, well, we just wanted to go eat lunch. Like,
right.
Wait a second.
It feels like it makes it so much worse. This child, this 12-year-old got their life ruined.
And Christine saying, as a grandmother of a 12-year-old, I take this very seriously. Mm-hmm. I like Christine. I like her for saying that too. She's bringing her own experience into it. She's rationalizing, trying to, make sense of it, make it her own thing. Feels like she's doing what a jury's supposed to do. She's deliberating in her brain, right?
Right. She's using
the whole
reason
thing.
and
mm-hmm. And
right.
Then you've got people that are just hanging out and just sick of being there, done over it. They were never even there to begin with, right? Or if they were, they faded away long ago. Now it's over.
Yeah. And it seems like they were able to just convince everyone to go in one direction. And that's like infuriating when you hear that after the fact.
On a 12-year-old,
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard enough when you hear about it as an adult, but you're right. As a 12-year-old, it's just like, so tragic.
What do you have against a kid?
Right? Chris's father, Joe, told the media that he supports his son, even though the victims were his own parents.
I mean, no, that's not a true statement, though.
Yeah, he says it in words, but not in actions.
I was like, you said it, and I was like, okay, I am loopy as hell, but wait, no, that still doesn't make sense, Joe.
He's just trying to talk to the media and get sympathy for his son, but he's not really there to do the hard work and really be present for his child.
No, not at all.
Joe also attempted to get a pardon from Governor Mark Sanford and President Bush. He said, quote, "I love my son with all of my heart, as I did my mom and dad. If they were here today, they would be begging for mercy as well." Pfizer, the manufacturer of Zoloft, issued the following statement after the verdict was read. Quote, "Zoloft didn't cause his problems, nor did the medication drive him to commit murder. On these 2 points, both Pfizer and the jury agree."
Well-crafted statement.
Right?
Yeah.
They pay people big bucks to say things like that.
Beige statement.
Despite Pfizer's deflection, in the year after this conviction, there were 3 murders committed by people taking Zoloft, but only 1 was acquitted. Again, it makes me think, what would happen today? In October 2006, Chris's attorneys took his appeal and request for a pardon to South Carolina's Supreme Court. The lawyers also requested that Chris be able to stay in a juvenile facility until he turned 18. But they decided that he should be sent to adult prison, even though he was only 15 years old when he was convicted.
That's not okay. How do these decisions get made?
It just seems like brutality. Like he's got to be... I hope that someone was looking out for him in there. I really hope,
Yeah.
But if not, I just can't imagine that he wasn't, just victimized, and really taken advantage of and beat up and really made to look weak. After reviewing the case, the Supreme Court upheld his conviction in a 4-1 decision. In 2008, his attorneys tried to appeal for a reduction in his 30-year sentence, but the Supreme Court denied to even hear the appeal.
I mean, oh God, this is so frustrating.
Like, I know that, as we've seen through, it's one of the things that came up in Making the Murder Part 2, especially, there's only so many appeals and things that the Supreme Court can agree to hear. And, they, I guess, use their discretion on what's a valid, point, a valid argument to bring in and hear. But it is very tragic that there's so many other, this isn't the only one. It just brings up the point that so many other people are out there trying to get some justice, possible people that are innocent and need to be exonerated, other things like that, where they just can't even get their case heard. I wish we had more justices to sit on the Supreme Court so that we could take more of these cases and look into them,
They made a decision. Like, it's just like, very, not the same, but similar, with like the Avery thing. It's like, we're just not hearing this. We've made our decision. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, just go away.
We're not even going to have an appeal. Just go away.
Exactly. So Christopher is still in prison in South Carolina, and he rarely has visitors since his remaining family is still all in Florida. Chris's older sister Danielle married a Marine, and they had a baby girl who she named Joy after her paternal grandmother that Chris murdered.
That's precious.
Yeah.
I love the name Joy too.
It is nice.
It's a joyous name. This, I mean, we're like, would this happen today? This still is happening today, but we hope for the future. And also you only really see psoriatic arthritis drugs nowadays, right? Not so much. But, I mean, it's a chicken or the egg.
Right.
Because he was kind of, you come from a broken home and then you add, instability, there it is, and all these other things. And then, the drug is on top of it. And he's going through the side effects. It's clear he's being really affected by it. So it's just really sad that, again, he, fell through the cracks. And he's that age too, like the teen angst age, where it's hard to communicate. It's hard to get anything out of him. He probably, the moments he wants to be open, they don't, it's always off. This is this one's really sad. The killer kids are sad.
They are. All of them are really tragic, and it's just, oh man, they're heavy.
Some of them also, when you research them, some of them come across as you get to know these kids in a way, and it's like the way they're written about too. It sort of sways it, but some of them are really cocky little assholes, right? And some of them are just like kids that came from a rough upbringing. Some of them, grew up without parents, for example, and were abandoned and grew up with their grandparents. You're either going to soar and go to Harvard on scholarship, or it's probably you're going to have years of adjustment issues. I just feel really bad for this kid. I tried all those drugs too, and like doctors put you on stuff. I remember when I was a kid, like I was on Prozac at like 12. Same thing.
And that's the thing is like the majority of these prescriptions in adult and children, they don't result in this kind of stuff. You may have minor side effects or, maybe you need to sleep a little bit more or, whatever these things are. But it's in a very extreme anomaly for a kid to do this, But like you said, it's a testament to being both things at the same time. It's a chicken and egg thing. It's, the fact that his family was the way that it was. Then he was put on this medication, and then the family issues are still arising, but he's not really himself because of the medication, and this is how he coped with it. And so, yeah, it's just like I said, if I was on that jury, I would have a really tough time.
This would have been really hard.
I probably would have leaned towards not guilty, just knowing the fact that he's facing minimum 30 years. I don't necessarily think that's right, but in my heart, I know that I would be like, I couldn't live with myself sending a 12-year-old away for 30 years, you know? But at the same time, he did this. You have to hold him accountable. There's got to be something, you know?
I think if this happened now, he would get more of what I'll refer to as like a gypsy sentence.
Right. Let's
You know?
do a 10 years. Let's,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I agree. I think that this would have been very different. It would have had a different outcome in 2019. And hopefully we can continue to move forward with a lot of our conversations about mental health, about psychiatric treatment, so that people can take the medication that works for them, find the medication that works for them, and have it be destigmatized. It's not up to us to police whether someone else is, in quotes, crazy. You know, that's what we're
Yes.
trying to do in the public. I feel like people are just very eager to put the crazy label on people. And the reality is, everyone's just trying to do their best to be as emotionally healthy as they can. And it's very brave to go on medication. It's very brave for someone to go into the hospital and say, I can't do this on my own. I need some help. So I hope that we're continuing to move in the right direction. But this is one of those cases where, yes, it was like just at the right time where there was a ton of new drugs, not a lot of information, yet a lot of stigma. You know, all these things combined together just really, really played a role in this case and the outcome. A very interesting Killer Kids episode, and one that I feel like we could go on discussing for a long time. This is actually a pretty long episode because it's just like there's so much you can say about it. There's so many ways you can dissect it and really read into what happened. So next week, we'll be back with another Killer Kid, probably a little shorter than this.
Maybe. I don't know. This Killer Kid is killer crazy.
Stop saying crazy. Let's not stigmatize.
I know. What am I thinking?
So before we get out of here, we just want to say thank you again to our new Patreon supporters, Terry, Manu, Sui, and Diana.
Thank you.
So again, you're going to hear ads on these episodes. We're really excited to be on a new host site that does this for us. And if you want to get ad-free episodes and bonus episodes, you can join our Patreon too. Patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast. So, if you haven't already rated, reviewed, and subscribed, we would appreciate that too. I see a lot of people sharing our posts on Facebook, adding us to their stories. I know that you guys are telling your friends about us. We love you guys for that and really appreciate it. And I'm just really grateful that we have really awesome, really wonderful listeners like you guys. So I just wanted to say thank you to you.
Thank you all. We are so appreciative. Everything. All the shares, all the likes. We love you all.
So with all that said, I think we'll get out of here. And in the meantime, before next week, before you hear from us again, check out that Ukrainian 6-year-old adoptee bonus episode on Patreon.
I can't
Courtney
get that
put
out
together
of my head.
a wild ride with a ton of information. Every time I saw an article, it was just snippets, and Courtney put it all in one. So much info, and we went through it and really took a deep dive. So I really would highly suggest that episode. As you know, along with a lot of the other episodes we put out on Patreon are awesome, but that was a particularly in-depth one.
That was good.
So thank you guys for listening this week, and hopefully we will see you next week and with another Killer Kid.
Sounds good.
Have a good one.
See ya.
Bye. We all have songs that remind us of our first love and bands that make us think of a certain friend. Maybe you have a workout playlist or a favorite album to listen to on road trips. But do you ever wonder what was going on in the lives of the artist when they wrote the music that you connect to your own memories? Rockumentary Podcast fills in the blanks on what you may not know about the iconic artists making the music that's so meaningful to our own lives. Each episode is an in-depth biography spanning from a musician's childhood through all the challenges of their journey to success and how they handled finally achieving fame. On Rockumentary, you'll hear about Kurt Cobain becoming a janitor at the same high school that he dropped out of, or how Jimi Hendrix was kidnapped and held for ransom for 2 days. Our episodes include details about Notorious B.I.G. marrying Faith Evans after knowing her for only a week, and Phil Spector pulling a gun on the Ramones when they tried to end a long recording session. You may know the music, but on Rockumentary, you'll hear the stories behind the songs. Search for Rockumentary on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you like to listen to podcasts.
Finding the right pros for home projects can be tough and spark a lot of questions like, how do I find a pro who can help? Will they do a good job? Will I get a fair price? That's where Home Advisor can help. From leaky faucets to major remodels, Home Advisor connects you to the right pro for the job in seconds and even helps you get a fair price. Read reviews, check project cost guides, and book appointments. Go to homeadvisor.com or download the free Home Advisor app to start your next project.
At Metro, the best deal in wireless is on. Switch to Metro and get 1 full Amazon Prime membership included every month. Plus, get 2 free phones from top brands like Samsung and LG with huge HD screens. All with 2 lines for just $90. That's the best deal in wireless, only at Metro. Plus sales tax and activation fee. Requires port-in of eligible number not currently active on T-Mobile network or active on Metro in past 90 days. Limit 4 per account or household. Offer subject to change. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Amazon Prime has a $12.99 per month value. Restrictions apply. See store for details and terms and conditions.